Okay, everybody, it is 2 o'clock, and we will go ahead and get started. What an amazing turnout for a January day. Thank you so much for coming to our first Fabulous Friday of the year. For those who don't know me, my name is Lena Homburger-Cordia. I'm the Community Engagement Director here at the Buffalo County Historical Society. And I just have a couple of brief announcements before we get into the main ticket of the day. Sports pun definitely intended. So, today, you probably saw a little bit of my mess coming in. We are also getting ready to prepare for this year's theme at the museum, which is called Keeping Score. So all of our exhibits and a lot of our programming for the year have to do with sports and recreation. So today's talk very much fits in that thread. So we're going to start building more. I was hoping to have more set up before you arrived today, but of course, things came up. We got this book that I'm going to talk about in just a minute, and that took me away from that. But please do check out, if you haven't seen it already, we have our 2025 brochure. This has all of the major exhibits and the major programs of the entire year laid out for you. That doesn't mean that there won't be more. We will add more throughout the year, and we announce those on our website and on Facebook, but this is always a great place to start. And the big thing, we got the sesquicentennial books in. I didn't join this project until the spring of this year, so I came in very, very late to the game. But I was a major part in getting this finally to print, so I know many of you have been waiting a long time for that. I hope we have done it justice, and so these are available. We're very pleased, and someone who's new to the community like me, I have to say, all of these family histories were so fascinating, and so it was a pleasure to do the editing and getting them all together. On the horizon, on Valentine's Day, our next Fabulous Friday, will be Dr. Nathan Tye talking about love in the archives. Very romantic. That is also the day that we are opening our traveling exhibit from the Kaufman Museum, A Day with the Birds. And we're going to have a complimentary exhibit on hunting, trapping, and fishing in Buffalo County that will open that same day. So if you don't have any Valentine's Day plans, go ahead and mark us down because it'll be a fun day. With that, I'm going to introduce Mary Beth Lowe. She's on our Fabulous Friday committee, and she's going to introduce today's speaker. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Lena. I think we need to give Lena a round of applause. If it wasn't for Lena, that book would not have been finished, at least not yet. So, and that was a long process. Prices on the book, $20 for members.
Yes. 25 for non-members.
25 for non-members. I would really encourage everyone to be members. Do you get the Buffalo Tales? Hopefully you're getting those at home. If you're a member, you're getting it. It has a lot of great information. Again, this is thanks to Lena. Lena does a lot around here. So, and this last, of course, who wrote this article on the Mid-State Project, Part 1, is by Kevin McGregor. A lot of great information. So please join us if you want a membership form. See one of the ladies at the front desk. Also, what else does Lena do? My goodness, what would we do without her? If you saw this in the paper, she gets that to the paper and makes sure that everyone has access to that information. So next up, and again, make sure you join us in February. Another popular speaker is Dr. Nathan Tye, and I'll just put a quick plug in here. But he will be speaking February 12th at noon on Albert Frederick Lewis, Kearney's Forgotten Lacrosse Champion. So again, that's coming up too. We like to partner with the history department at UNK. And so Kevin McGregor will be talking about the history of the Windmill State Recreation Area near Gibbon, Nebraska. Thank you.
We'll get started here. I'd like to first introduce, sitting at the southeast table, Grant Gardner, who is the current superintendent of Windmill Park, Mark Clymer, who was the superintendent of Windmill Park from 1980 to 2015, Laura Rose, who was affiliated with Windmill Park 20 years ago or so, and then Gene Hunt from Fort Kearney are here today, and they can help fill in. They're here, they can answer questions. I've already asked them about that, and they can correct, add, or do whatever they need to do for part of this presentation. So without further ado, we'll get started. There we go. Okay, it all started with the interstate. Windmill would not be here without the interstate. And a lot of folks think, well, the interstate started in 1956. The first act that I am aware of where they mention interstate highway was actually passed in December of 1944. They were getting ready to have a new world after the war. They actually had verbiage within some of these some of this legislation that says, once the war's over and we have money to do it, then we're going to start doing some of this stuff. But at this point, this is where I first saw that it was defined that there would be a national system of interstate highways not exceeding 40,000 miles. And in 1956, that's pretty much what they ran with. In 1947, the Federal Highway Commissioner proposed the first proposed set of routes for the interstate highway. For me, 1947 is interesting, being an old telecom guy. 1947 is also the year that the Bell system introduced the North American Numbering Plan area, the area codes and number system we use today for phones. And so in both cases, it was a new world after the Depression and the war. We're going to prepare for this brand new world in the United States. This is a publication that the state of Nebraska put out in 1948. This is, if you want to look at this thing, it's in the second floor half-level stacks of the south wing of Love Library, for those of you who are familiar with it. And that's an interesting building. Now you look, this is the drawing of the routes that were proposed in 1947. You see pretty much as it is today. You can see falling from Omaha to Lincoln and then following the bend of the valley. It's very characteristic right here. Popping down into Denver. The one that's a little different is going across Kansas, from Kansas City to Denver. But other than that, in 1947, they pretty much decided this is where the stuff's going to go. And this is just for information. This is a traffic volume map for the state of Nebraska, again from 1947. The thicker the line, the more the traffic. So that's why they dictated where it was going to go. But they were going to go from Omaha to Lincoln, and then to get over here to Grand Island, you go straight across there, where it is now. And there was plans in the interim there from 1952 before the 1956 Act. And this information here came from a 50-year anniversary booklet that the State Department of Roads put out on the history of the interstates, and there's a printed copy of that over on the table over there. And it's also available online through the Nebraska Library Commission. Okay, February 1st, 1956. D.E. McGregor had made a proposal. For those of you who don't know, D.E. McGregor was my grandfather. He said that he wanted to build the interstate right in the river. Well, that didn't happen, but notice down here, by pumping a grade, a series of ponds 150 to 250 feet wide could be created on the south banks of the river in the grade. Small lakes could be created and resort areas could provide recreation spots. This is the first I've seen of mentioning being able to dig gravel for the grade of the interstate and then use the sand pits, because as you know around here, you dig a hole filled with water, closer to the river particularly, that you could then use for recreation. A copy of the original proposal is in this green notebook right here, which is from the Gibbon Heritage Center. One specific thing that Grandpa mentioned in his proposal is that he could make it look like Lenoma Beach, which is in between Lincoln and Omaha, where that funky water tower is on Highway 6. He went down to the State Highway Department and actually talked to him about it. And basically it said, state engineer says, you don't know what you're talking about. And hurled a bunch of questions at him about grade and land rights, water rights, et cetera, and he basically reiterated that this would not eat up all the farmland, you wouldn't split farms, and so forth and so on. One thing you will notice is that in his original report and in the response here, there's no mention of environmental considerations. But look at the times. Well, the next day, Lincoln Journal came out, had a little editorial and said, it's quite possible the state engineer told DE that he does not know what he's talking about. But they said the idea is intriguing, probably no more unsound than the Passamaquoddy project. Now that was a project in eastern Maine to harness tides for doing electric power. Actually was proposed first clear back in the early 1920s. And then with a bridge going to Straits of Mackinac between Lake Huron and Lake Michigan to Key West. And it says, a highway along the bottom of the river with grades and trees, said maybe a lagoon for swimming every 8 miles or so would be a tourist attraction. And there he does know what he's talking about. The tourists may get a little wet now and then, but they could wear their swimming suits for the Nebraska adventure. Now, this is Lincoln Journal, mainline paper. So certainly would make Nebraska talked about, and the talk wouldn't be just expressions of relief at crossing the state by night, which is what you often hear now. The idea should be filed for reference in the event something goes wrong with Nebraska's football revival. You know, they've been talking about football revival and football for a very long time. I can give you an example from the UNL Cornhusker Annual from 1916 that actually references Oregon A&M. So for the next 3 years, they argued and did this and that about trying to define exactly where the interstate's gonna go. Folks south of the river, like from Minden, wanted to have the interstate go south of the river. But this was the proposed location in 1959, pretty much where it is now and where it always had been. The folks on the south side of the river didn't really get anywhere. Folks from Minden were the most vocal about it. And in January 1960, they took a vote. It was 5-2 by the Highway Commission saying we're gonna put the interstate basically where that is, not on the south side. The representative from Minden voted against it. I don't recall the name right now. And the representative from Scottsbluff County voted against it. I don't know, I have some ideas, but. So then they resurrected the idea again. Governor Ralph Brooks would say he would look in favor of putting the interstate in the riverbed if this is feasible. So it bubbled up to the governor. But then the state engineer said it would not be feasible. And then they said Mel Steen, who was the director of the Game and Parks Commission at that time, you'll hear more about Mel Steen as we go along here, said it would be. So that kind of went up and down a little bit, and talking about the governor, it had bubbled up again. And then here's the Grand Island Independent the next day. So there's nothing new about the idea. And it says, Mr. McGregor, on the other hand, came up with it a couple of years ago. They had a typo there with DF. And it says, on the other hand, can offer a rather convincing argument that it can be done. And so the credit or the blame, however you look at it, belongs to our friend from Gibbon, Mr. McGregor. I'm taking some speaker's license here because that's my granddad, but he liked to get in the midst of things there. But then 2 days later, planned joint study of creating chain of lakes on interstate. So all that rigmarole, but then they started to do a formal study of it at the state level. And here they talk about not running it in the river, but running along the north bank of the river, lakes, and the state engineer said there's a lot of merit to the idea. So a lot of discussion. 1961, they started to work on getting some appropriations money to actually do the stuff. One thing I'm going to point out on this one says the Game Commission has proposed that their levy would go up from 0.13 mils to 0.35 mils. In other words, 2 to 3 times the mill levy. Now that's a mill levy, that's cents per thousand. The bills we get from Buffalo County today is per 100. So you'd have to divide that number by 10 to get an apples to apples today. But the other thing to point out here is that at that time, Nebraska did not have an income tax or a sales tax. Everything on the state was financed by the property tax. In 1966, there was a constitutional initiative that basically basically said, we're not gonna have state property tax anymore. So as of January 1, 1967, no state property tax. Same time, 1966 election, the 1965 legislature had passed a bill saying we'll have an income tax. Well, there was a referendum in the 1966 election that said, no, we're gonna repeal that thing. So all of a sudden in January 67, the state had no way of getting money. No income tax, no sales tax, no property tax, nothing. So they had to go into basically fire drill mode and came up with the basis of the state sales tax and income tax that we have to this day. (1961), Melstein disclosed that groundwork's being laid for lakes at interchanges Gibbon, Elm Creek, and Cozad. And D.E. McGregor told the Chamber of Commerce, this is out of the Gibbon Reporter, that he purchased the Phil Mosser farm and was letting the State Game Commission and Parks Department have about 80 acres of it on which to create a lake or park. At that point, he purchased the land, part of the land that would now become Windmill Park. The 80 acres, it morphed into details. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. I thought since I've been talking about my grandfather, I'd show a picture of him. Grandpa is number 4. And this is a formal team photo of the Gibbon Lions Club basketball team from 1960. I say it's formal because Clyde Smith ran a photography shop in Gibbon at that time, and this ran in the Gibbon Reporter. Plus they have a basketball in front of them, so you know it's a formal team photo with the basketball. But these guys just had a good time doing that. My grandfather was 66 at that time. Harry Thornton over here was actually a little bit older. Harry later became a Buffalo County supervisor. And Harry Thornton was born in Thornton Township in 1893, so that might be another story to do research on if he was related to the folks the township's named after. Anyway, they had a good old time. Here's a couple other pictures that a little less so. The one on the left, I would like to have folks help me out with it a little bit as to who took the picture. This photo on the left here accompanied an article that Carol Lomacki wrote that ran in the Kearney Hub on July 30th, 1977 about Grandpa, that she wrote that a week short of his 84th birthday, he was still hard at it with his stuff. And if Carol was the one that took her own photos, then this photo of Grandpa was one that Carol Lomacki took. So I guess I'd like to find out if there's any contacts for Carol, if anybody knows that I could check with her and see if, verify whether or not she took the photo or not. And we have an original print of it here, the green notebook as well. I'll just briefly state that one thing he mentioned to her in that article is that as a future endeavor, he'd like to have a memorial recognition to the fact that Gibbon is the geographic gateway to the west, and that every trail and every type of communication and transportation funnels into the Platte Valley within 6 miles of Gibbon. So he was wanting to have a monument to all the trails and stuff that went through here at that time. Kind of sounds like the arch. Okay, I'm going to digress here. Talk about the land acquisition. I'm going to start out with the history of Fort Kearney. Just to put a little background here. The west side of Windmill sits in this area right here. And this is from Lyle Mantor of his history of Fort Kearney. It said that the commanding officer of the military stations established on the route to Oregon will make a reserve of 10 miles square around the same and cause it to be surveyed and divided, which boundaries are clearly marked and indicated for convenience for future reference. And then it says down below here that extending along both sides of the Platte River, the reservation included the intervening islands of the river to the western edge of its boundary, and all of the islands to the east for a distance of 6 miles beyond the eastern part of the boundary as an island reserve. So when they did this initial survey in 1866 of Gibbon Township, Gibbon sits up here in section 13. They didn't survey the fort area. They also didn't survey this part over here, which is part of the island reserve. Another thing to note on this, as far as the land division, is that these other ones are divided into sections, quarters, halves, that kind of things. Section 36, even from the very beginning, from what I've been able to tell, was divided into lots instead of quarters and sections. So you look at the reference of the land acquisitions, and it always references lots, even from the 1880s and 1890s. 36 was also a school section. I have not found any records of any homesteads in section 36, because it was a school section, so it was leased. In 1877, they came back and surveyed the part that was the fort after it was abandoned and opened it up to settlement. Another interesting thing there is that the odd-numbered sections in the original survey were railroad sections that the railroad sold. But after it was surveyed in 1877, the odd-numbered sections, for instance, it's a little hard to read, but like for instance, section 35 there, they weren't railroad sections. And so they, even though they were odd-numbered sections, there were homesteads on them, and people could do it in the way that the even-numbered sections were done. So that's what I find for some of the history buffs. I thought I'd throw that in there because it's an interesting tidbit. I won't dwell on it. This is Shelton Township, just to the east. You can see there that the island reserve went clear over here to the border of Hall County and along through the south part of there. And then here's when they came back and resurveyed, and it's labeled East Boundary Fort Kearney Island Reserve. That's 1877 survey. So we started out with that. And in 1890, a man named John Case bought 1,200 acres of which include where Windmill is now. And then in 1902, George Linger bought about 1,200 acres of that same spot where Windmill is now. And you look at the sale of that thing, and it says he purchased lots 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. The lots, original lots are basically 40s, so there's 16 of them, but not all of them were lots. So he bought that, and then in 1912, a fellow named Henry Flower, who was a banker from Kansas City, bought the 1,200 acres for $103,000, $85 an acre at that time. And then in 1917, Henry Flower decided to subdivide the thing, make a subdivision called Linger Subdivision, which still exists. And in 1917, in March, he had an auction where he auctioned off the 11 lots of Linger Subdivision. They had it as a big event. The newspapers at the time said 2,300 people showed up for the auction, and they sold all the 11 lots. Just as a kind of a name drop again, lots 7 and 8 over here at that auction were purchased by Ralph Barney. I don't know if anybody who knows who Ralph Barney is, but his son was Warren R. Barney, and his grandson's Kent Barney, and they've been around here for generations. Well, now came 1962, 61, 62, when my grandfather purchased it. Sam Spar put out a new plat of this thing in 1962 so they could get more organized when the interstate was coming through. Interstate comes through about like so. And what the purchase of the different lots were. And this plat and the other one are in the Register of Deeds office at the Buffalo County Courthouse. And what I did on these to get them is I took cell phone photos of the big, they're about yay big. And then Lorinda Wisey, who's the archivist at UK, digitized an item for me one time, and she just showed me the feature in Photoshop where I could photo merge them together, stitch them together. And I just wanted to give her credit for pointing me in the right direction, not have to reinvent the wheel to put these plats together. They're not perfect because it's my cell phone photos. Okay, here's the land acquisition time frame. October 1961, B. McGregor purchased Linger Subdivision lots 3 and 5. And in 62, he sells parts of the Linger Subdivision lots 3 and 5 to the state of Nebraska for the interstate right of way. And I don't know, Is anybody familiar with the meets and bounds description of property? There are some really tortured almost meets and bounds descriptions of the property for the interstate and the other properties as it was sold. I have the records up here from the courthouse. I can show you what some of those look like. They would start at a point and go this direction for so many feet, this direction so many feet, this direction so many feet, this direction so many feet, and then eventually back to the beginning, and then to have so many acres more or less. They'd always put more or less in there because they weren't certifying that it's exact. Even today, you wouldn't certify that it's exact, but said that's what it is, and that gave them the legal more or less. He swapped land with Benton Dubs to acquire parts of Linger Subdivision Lot 6, and Benton acquired the other parts of Linger Subdivision, or parts of Linger Subdivision 3 and 5. They divided it north half, south half. And then in May of '63, DE sold parts of Linger Subdivision Lots 3, 5, and 6, totaling 145 acres to the Nebraska Game, Forestation, and Parks Commission, which created the land where the bulk of Windmill is today. So that's when the state acquired the land. And then in September 1964, the State Highway Department transferred 22 acres that they had gotten originally for interstate right-of-way that after they built the interstate, found they didn't need, and that brought it up to the current 167 and a little bit acres at Windmill. This is a screenshot from the Buffalo County Geographical Information System on the current property boundaries. All these kind of yellowish, brownish lines are the property boundaries. And even today, lots 3, lots 5, lot 6, if you look at the property descriptions for Windmill, it still shows Linger's subdivision, part of tract 6, part of tract 5, with a meets and bounds description because they split the tracts in two. And it even gets worse down south of the interstate there. They took Linger subdivision and created a new subdivision for more houses. And Kelly John over at the courthouse, our register of deeds, this wasn't one of her happy places to try to deal with some of this stuff because of all, like I say, started with lots, subdivided, still subdivided, re-subdivided, and you can see all the different splits of the different Linger's lots there. It's kind of a mess, but at least it's well documented. It's all public information, it's all in the courthouse. The state hired a student at the University of Nebraska Architecture Department to come up with a model of what they would think would be a preliminary sketch of what a wayside area might look like along Interstate 80. And you see it's kind of, you can see how Windmill kind of, not exact, but went with that model. Here's the aerial shot of the construction of the interstate at Gibbon in August of 1962. This is out of the hub. This is looking south. And the original lake, it's a little hard to see, is down in here. And I scanned this from the original newspaper. I didn't even scan it from the scan of a scan. It still just wasn't real good quality print. Just for interest, this is the one at Kearney out of the same issue. Central Avenue is the section road coming in from the south. Second is the section road going in from the north. 24th Street's the second standard parallel of survey, and that's where you get the offsets. If you go over east of town on Coal Chute and look where Antelope Road comes in, you'll see the offset. In 1863, Mel Steen announced that the commission authorized the purchase of 145 acres of land. Now I'm going to mention one thing here that I'm going to talk about as part of going a little further. In 1981, a plaque in honor and memory of my grandfather was dedicated at Windmill Park. And at that time, Dale Bree, who was the head of the game division of the State Game and Parks Commission, came out and gave a talk. And part of what he gave was a history of the Windmill Park. And I'll just read a little bit of this. Wake Malstein, no doubt, was the most vocal about the possibilities offered of the chain of lakes, but then he sat in the right place at the right time. It is interesting to note that Mr. McGregor once told us, myself and other staff members, that it was he, Mac, who first suggested the chain of lakes to Malstein, and Mel, quickly realizing the idea for what it was worth, expanded on it. At any rate, both Mel and Mac played a leading role in the idea. And from that idea evolved Mormon Island State Wayside at the Grand Island Interchange, along with Cheyenne Wayside at Wood River, Warax at Shelton, Union Pacific at Odessa, and numerous wildlife areas from Grand Island west. The total size of this park area consists of 154.19 acres of land and 13.5 acres of surface water. This is 1981. About this time, in fact, on the 4th of October 1962, it was October of 81 when they did this, the first paper or legal steps were taken when Mr. McGregor and his wife Lillian signed a sand and gravel lease with Ben and Robert Leonard to expand the sand and gravel mixing on this tract and to pump and store spoil or waste material in such a manner as to allow an attractive and functional combination of land and water to be adapted to what you enjoy here today. Windmill State Wayside Area. It's called Wayside Area at that time. As was mentioned earlier, there was already a county sand pit in the area where Windmill is now. So that's why they talked about to expand the sand and gravel mixing on the track. With this foresight, the development was underway. Very interesting to note that across the bottom of this initial document concerning the site, there's written in Mr. McGregor's handwriting, quote, started pumping today, September 23rd, 1962. This is interesting because obviously he knew what he was doing even before he didn't sign the lease until October of 1962. Less than 2 years later, on April 25th, 1964, a new sand and gravel lease was executed as a sale of the land had been made to the state Nebraska Game and Parks Commission in April 1963. There were, of course, many other legal documents necessary at the time. One of the important ones was to get authorization from Governor Morrison, Frank Morrison, to purchase the land. He needed to get the governor's authorization. So I have no idea what Frank might have thought about that. Frank was from Cook, by the way, and he was one of the big instigators of the archway over here 25 some years ago. And they also transferred the acreage I talked about from the roads department to the Game and Parks Commission. One term they used for it was road branches. That was a term that was used at the start instead of wayside area or recreation area. It was a road branch. This is an eye chart, but I want to show you some of the work they were doing. And I might not even put this in here, but this is a topographic map that shows the drainage of Windmill Park that was surveyed in 1964. I got this from the folks at Windmill. And again, I took a big picture and then took some pictures and stitched it together. Because they were worried about lay of the land and putting in other lakes. The swim lake is up here. You notice it's not there at that point. This is 1964. I'm just going to go through a couple of clippings here to kind of point out how the progress went. This is from the Hub in September 1965. It says, Mel Steen, the controversial director of the State Game Commission, who's never been accused of thinking small, has a vision that borders on obsession about the future of outdoor recreation area. And if not the hub, he is at least considers the periphery of interstate through the Platte Valley a major cog in the grand design. He made a surprise trip over there and says, while more stringent critics have charged that Steen is a land-grabbing feudal lord who wants to aggrandize the whole state as a game commission playground, the doughty commission chief writes off all such barbs as short-sighted. Okay. One of the other things they mention here on this one is the third category of outdoor recreation area is a wilderness area, and they talk about this one going from a mile west of the Gibbon interchange to Newark, to the Newark-Minden interchange. That's the Bassway Strip now. So even at that time, they're planning that, but that's as far as they'd gotten in 1965. This is from the Grand Island Independent. And one thing I'll mention here on this one is that it said 165 acres of land, about 5 acres with 2 lakes are open to the public as of June of 1966. And the balance of the 160 acres to be developed, and again, they're talking to my granddad again, the independent reporter was there. I don't know if it took a long time to hash because they're having trouble, well, funding is always an issue. I don't know if all the rigmarole with the sales tax, or not sales tax, but the property tax and then trying to get income tax all went away. I've read items in other projects at the time, including the mid-state one that I wrote the paper about, that there was a lot of pressure on federal funds at that time because of stuff going on in Vietnam, plus the space program, and then trying to build the rest of the interstate whole hog, and then trying to do everything else at once. Remember my folks, I think it was my folks, talked about, you could either have guns or butter, is how they put it during wartime, guns or butter, and then in the 60s they're trying to have guns and butter. But there's only so much to go around, so that might be part of the reason it just took a long, long time. This one, it said in 1967 they'd gotten 3.7 miles of road in, but they hadn't blacktopped them. So Winston Lindsay, who was the superintendent, the first superintendent of Windmill Park, said he was not optimistic that it was going to be usable in 1968. Here's some more from Dale Bree. It says, with all this work accomplished, contracts were left in 1968 on June 24th for Clark and Anderson of Lincoln to plan the road ranch at Gibbon. Things were moving now, and as Winston Lindsay would attest, it was at times a difficult road to completion. This is an Omaha World Herald article about Mel Steen. Mel was controversial, so the state senator once suggested that money should be found to get him out of Nebraska. Says he's drawn the wrath of historical societies from Cook to Ponca, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That being said, when he passed away in 1974, Willard Barbie, his successor, was quoted in the Lincoln Journal that the two men who had put Nebraska on the map nationally were Mel Steen and Bob Devaney. And he did it in that order. Of course, Willard was his successor and was on the commission at the time. Mel was the head, so obviously he had his biases when he's talking about it. But in 1968, the National Geographic had an article about the interstate highway system in February. I have a copy of the front and first and last page there. The author of that article happened to be from Omaha, and he talked about at the end of that National Geographic article specifically about the chain of lakes and how he was proud of being a Nebraskan and what they had done in the chain of lakes area from Grand Island to North Platte. So it did get a lot of national press. Okay, October 29th, 1970, New Windmill State Wayside will open here on November 1st. And the lake's pretty much as they are today. And here's a 1970 aerial view of the park. This is from the Gibbon Heritage Center, and it's noted in the donation card that it was right after the trees were planted. They had a big dedication ceremony on April 7th, 1971, which was Gibbon's centennial date. And then this is the picture for the folks that were there that day. I'm in the band there somewhere. Let's see, get this in order here. That's Mel Steen. He'd retired in 1970, but he was there. That's my grandfather. The one next to him was Willard Barbie, who was the current head of the State Game and Parks Commission, and then Albie Zimmerman, Gibbon local, is the one next to him. And this is a Nebraska Central Telephone Company truck, which is our business. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about the name. So it's situated at the Gibbon interchange between Kearney and Grand Island, draws its name from the locale Windmill Crossing, where the Pawnee forded the Platte River. Now this would have been done, what is referred to as the Pawnee going on buffalo hunts between 1866 and 1874. They're talking about after the railroad went through in 1866, but before they went from their moved from their reservation up around Genoa, Nance County down to Oklahoma. And they're talking about going from Genoa southwest in the general direction of Trenton. We know they probably went that direction because Massacre Canyon Monument's over that way, with a battle between the Sioux and the Pawnee in 1873. And Dale Bree commented on the name, says, in 1969, the area still needed to have an official name and a number of suggestions were pursued. But one that seemed to be most appropriate actually had to do with the native Nebraskans, the Pawnee. Dr. Jean Weltfish, and it's spelled G-E-N-E, but it's female Jean. And she has quite a background too, if somebody wants to read about her. An anthropology professor from Fairleigh Dickinson University in New Jersey had written a book about Pawnee Indians. This is the book right here. And this is the copy that I checked out from the UNK library. Copyright 1965. There's also a copy at UNL. And this is an original 1965 copy. University of Nebraska Press did a reprint in 1977. Yep, this is an original. And she said and he has his, but it's actually female. Her research and interviews with elder Pawnees, and she did some of this research in the early 1930s. And she had interesting experiences during World War II, I'll put it that way. During her research with the elder Pawnees, found an interesting sidelight that applies to this place. She found that the Pawnees had gone this way to and from their annual winter hunt to secure a very important item for their very existence on those winter journeys. The Pawnees were seeking buffalo skins that were a full growth of, well, wool, I'm guessing you call it fur for buffalo, with which to make their robes for winter. I quote from Dr. Weltfish's field notes, what she was told by an old Pawnee man, quote, on the return, after coming due northward from the Republican, a camp was made 4 miles west of Fort Kearney. Next day they went to Grand Island, the island, not the town, but the island, the head of which was south of Gibbon, because Fort Kearney was originally built at the head of Fort Kearney. It shifted around over the years, as was the Platte, but you look at the maps from that time, the west end of Grand Island was pretty much straight south of Gibbon, just a little bit south of where Windmill is today. Went to Grand Island to camp. All the Skeeries, which was a subgroup of the Pawnee, camped at the west end of Grand Island. There were many islands in the Platte, though none the size of Grand Island, which was from 30 to 60 miles long. And then a couple of other groups, the Swawi, and I'm butchering the names, and the Pithawarata, and there's words that help, what's the right word for it? Anyway, tell you how to pronounce it. Had gone on ahead, didn't rejoin the Skeeries. When they got to this place, they probably camped in some of the smaller islands toward the east. The islands were warm in winter. Well, that would have been a relative term, but maybe the surrounding water, and with the trees, the islands had the trees, there weren't trees anywhere else, maybe that did help without the wind. And the Skeery camp was close to Windmill, a trader's post, as well as railroad station where one could sell the buffalo robes. And lots of beaver and other animals were trapped on Grand Island, and the Skeery stayed 10 to 12 days on Grand Island at this time. So this old Indian term, one we can all identify with, Windmill, significant landmark, became the most unique name for this site. And if one's interested, the field notes aren't in the book, but where the bookmark is here is the pages in here where she refers to Windmill and going from the hunting grounds on the Republican River back up to the loop at Genoa. This is a map I took, that's in Council Bluffs at the Union Pacific Railroad Museum. It's the original copy of the route map from 1866 of the Union Pacific route. Second 100 miles, 1 mile to the inch scale. This thing is long. And this is just the second 100 miles. At that time, the railroad took more of a curved route getting to Omaha, so instead of 189, Kearney was more like 193. Gibbon was 180 something instead of 176 that it is now. But I just wanted to show this because this is a map that's contemporaneous from when they were talking about that. And there's the Gibbon switch right up there, 1866. And here's the islands that come out to the west here. And there's actually a label up there that says Boyd's Siding for the Boyd Ranch. Okay, that's our trek back there. Now we're going to talk about the windmills. Okay, Windmill Park, you're supposed to have windmills. So this is a brief synopsis, and this is a copy from the current brochure that Windmill Park has. And we have copies of that brochure over there too. The largest windmill is a railroad windmill. The smaller Waplands windmill came from Louis Drake in Arcadia. A little story behind that. What a story behind all of them. And the Dempster windmill came from Paul and Carl Tenbensel from down at Wilsonville, which is over south of Cambridge, not very far from Kansas. This is the story of the Gibbon Reporter ran with the first one. They did some swapping and negotiation. Gene Hunt told me about that here a little bit ago. The windmill was used as a light pole up at the farm there at Arcadia. And since Nebraska Central had the phone exchange there, my granddad said, well, let's do a swap. We'll put a pole in there for you, we'll do it for you, if you'll exchange the windmill for us, and we can bring it, and we'll bring it down. And so that's what they did on that one. And they set it in place with the Nebraska Central Company boom truck. If they used our South boom truck, it was a 1946 International A-frame with a winch. And then this is one from the Omaha World Herald. Tom Allen was a columnist in the World Herald that was the person who went around the state to do human interest stories. He was doing it a long time. He started that in '59 and did it up to about 2001, 2002. I have a book over there that is a book of some of his stories that were collected at the time that he retired. My granddad didn't make it, but lots of other folks did. Anyway, Tom had a way with words. And he's talking about going with the Drakes and enter the Scotsman, that was my granddad, made the deal, donate the windmill, replace the pole, sent the crew up, and had them bring it back down. They said one couple from Cozad wheeled in to say they were happy, but now there's one windmill and windmill. So Winston Lindsay was the superintendent at that time, and Tom called him Windy for trying to get a hold of these windmills. This is just a little follow-up on that article in front of there. Winston Lindsay, Tom Allen stopped by to talk to Winston, and last week I said he walked in on me, and then said, how'd you get here so fast? I just got through hanging up the phone after talking to Mac. He told me he mailed a letter to you this morning, and then said I could have told him I was just driving by, but instead I told him Mac sent it by Windmail. Mac was another name that my granddad went by. Anyway, Tom had, well, that's what his job was. Well, then in 1973, a group of men in Gibbon decided to form what's called the Windmill Preservation Association to help pay for some of this stuff. Their job was to gather up funds to pay for the erection of some of these windmills. And Leroy Walker was the president. He's the man in the lower center. Albie Zimmerman's the man in the top there with the sunglasses. My granddad's the one on the lower left with the hat. And they created their own letterhead. I have a copy of the original letterhead over there on the table. Leroy, Albie, and Grandpa, and then Wilbur, Barbie, they Dale Bree and Winston Lindsay were ex officio trustees. And they sent the mail to P.O. Box P. Well, at that time in Gibbon, the big drawer mailboxes were lettered. The regular mailboxes with the combinations in the glass in them were regular numbers. But they're lettered, and P.O. Box P was the Nebraska Central Telephone Company post office box. So he said, send it to me. I have no idea what my dad thought of that, but he said, well, we'll sort it out. Let him have it, I suspect. And they invited folks to come by. This is the original wall pants. This is a picture of that. So I'm guessing this thing would have been 1973 photo. And I have the original photo over there on the table as well. Another one from Tom talking about the second windmill. It's a Dempster that came from Wilsonville. And they said originally they set that one up to actually pump water. But down below there it says, but Mac and Wendy, D.E. and Winston and Lindsay are still pacing like expectant fathers over number 3, the big son of a gun, which is the big railroad windmill, 60 feet from top, bottom to top with 20-foot blades. And here's a picture of its construction. Not a very good one. Here's some better ones. These are originals that we have at my mother's house that Grandpa probably took or he got from somebody, showing some of the efforts and the laying of the concrete. And this one says that they did such a good job that they decided to promote Winston out of the job at Windmill Park, send him to Lincoln to do some other things, but they were going to continue on. This is, I have the original over here. These are clippings from the reporter when they dedicated the plaque to my grandfather at Windmill in 1981, and that's where Dale Breeze came in to talk about some of the history. Dale is the one that's at the microphone in the top photo there. And this is my father, and this is Lillian, my grandmother, my dad's stepmother. Now, over the years, that big windmill has been a bit of an issue to keep maintained and repaired, being so big. So 1986, and I talked to Mark, he said 3 times over the years that you remembered. Here's the first time. There's the second time. That's Mark pointing at it from the reporter there. Now between the second and third time, and maybe Gene or Mark can comment on this, I imagine you probably remember some of that going on. But I won't put you on the spot if you don't want to say anything. But this showed up in the Hub in 2013, saying budget holes, they were going to potentially close down Fort Kearney and Windmill Park. Because obviously that didn't happen. They're still in existence. Those places along with 19 others, 21 in total. There's when it went up the third time. And then this is the article, I'll put you on the spot there, Mark. This is the article the Hub did about you in January 2016, talking about your retirement and interviewing you. We have originals and scanned copies of all this stuff in more detail, and in some cases, I have made scans from the original newspapers, and in other cases, I clipped the scanned copies online. They're all online. Okay, this is one where I'll need some help. Or tell me if I'm wrong. This is a list of the superintendents of Windmill State Recreation over the years, with the dates they were there. And that look pretty accurate, guys?
Except Laura was in there after Kogan, or during Kogan.
I think during COVID.
Kogan was in the military and was shipped out for a period of time, and at that time Laura Rose was,
Yeah, I stepped in for like 6 months as superintendent, so, yeah. That's pretty accurate.
Okay. Where are you? can stop now for questions, or I do have a few pictures of Windmill today that I took a week and a half ago on a sunny day that went up before it snowed. It's 5 minutes to 3 now, so whatever you want me to do, Lena.
Pictures is the vote.
What's that?
Pictures.
Picture? This is just a scan of one side of the current brochure. This is the other side. This shows more up-to-date detail. This is the map of the park that's on the side of the entrance station, and I took a picture, clipped it, cropped it, blew it up. It shows the locations of the swim lake. This is the Wapan windmill. Here's the Dempster windmill. Here's the big one over here. This is an ADA, Americans for Disability Act, accessible fishing dock. There's an archery range up here. And a pollinator garden that's in the process. Gardens like that take a little while. Okay, look, here's the entrance sign. There's the sign at the accessible fishing site. The lakes are stocked and have been pretty much from the very beginning in the 60s. There's a picture of the accessible dock. And that's looking toward the southeast, mostly east, toward lake number 2. The lakes have fancy names, lake 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Lake 1, on the sign there says bass. Lake 2, trout. That current, Grant?
Yep, caught some this morning.
Okay.
I really did.
Anyway, they have a crane viewing or a bird viewing blind there. You can look out at the field to the south there, or to the north. That's looking toward the north, excuse me. So when the birds are in the fields during the day. This is a picture of the number 1 hole on the disc golf course. That's in process. And in fact, Windmill's Give Where You Live project was to get some money to concrete the tees. And then this is a map of the layout. I got this from udisc.com. And udisc.com is a pretty thorough layout for disc golf courses. They even have one for the Centennial Park one across the street, for example, and for Davis Park and the one at Cotton Mill. It's crowdsourced, and refreshingly, the comments that you see on there aren't really bad comments. They just say, this is a work in progress, it'd be nice when the tees go in, or this, like the one at Davis Park and Gibbon. This is a really nice short course for folks that just want to do a quick course. It's freely accessible in the park, and they take good care of the grass in the park. And so if you want really long, it's not for you, but for getting off the interstate, it's a really nice one, say at Davis Park and down at Gibbon there. This is the swim lake. This is the archery range. Horseshoe pits. This is looking toward the north, at an open area there where the pollinator gardens are going to be. This is the historic sign that was put in 1971 at that dedication that we looked at earlier. And this is the brick thing that's holding the plaque for my grandfather that was placed in 1981, and there's a close-up shot of it. In honor of D.E. McGregor, whose ideas brought about this park and this windmill. And they started the process in 1980, and he passed away in 1980, Gibbon Chamber of Commerce. And in the green notebook over there, we have some of the original ordering materials when they ordered the plaque. So if you want to look at the receipts and the order sheets and stuff like that, when they ordered the plaque, it's all in there. This is a picture of the Wapans windmill. Again, I took that about a week and a half ago. Picture of the Dempster windmill. I had to get out of the way of disc golfers that were out that day because I was standing right in the middle of hole number 1. The number 1 tee is to the right from where I took the picture, and the hole is to the left. And I turned around after I took a picture of the number 1 hole and said, oh, I'm in the way. But I got them so that they were in the picture. They were to the right and the holes to the left, and I managed to time it so there wasn't a disc flying across there. And then that's the big windmill. Right now, the blades are up for repair again, and if I don't put Grant on the spot, I'll refer to him for more detailed information as to what the current situation is on that. But in full disclosure, would show that, but as we've seen, there've been several times over the years where it's been a maintenance headache to keep that thing up and running, so. That is it. We
Are there
have
any questions?
very knowledgeable people back here with questions, or whatever we can try to do or not do. Yeah, Gene, go ahead.
Was that a county sand pit originally?
As far as I know, Dwayne, that's what it was documented as. I don't know where it was exactly on there, but they talk about taking the county sand pit and then augmenting it, that's what I mentioned.
Well, when I was in grade school, it was a county sand pit. And the Gibbon garbage dump was across the road west. We're behind Lakeview Cafe.
Okay. In case you want to, that's Dwayne Frazier, who's, can I give you the term old timer? Give an old timer?
I was born in the Gibbon Hospital.
Anyway, okay, Gene.
Yes, I'd like to tell you, my name is Gene Hunt. I started my career at Windmill in '69, and I knew Matt, I knew Mel, and so many of the folks that he's talking about, I knew personally. And it's a fantastic presentation. Very, very happy.
I have a question. Is there a count on how many people use that? Do you keep track of what your usage is of the park?
Well, when they, in the article about when they were talking about closing things down, they quoted at that time, that's 10 years ago now, 50,000 at Windmill annually and 55,000 at Fort Kearney. Again, Grant and Gene would be the ones who would know about that.
So people
Yeah,
just
we
pull.
need to keep track of it. It's a little bit of estimating like with most things, but yeah, it's kept track of.
It gets a lot of use.
Yeah, yeah, I think it does. A lot of local people. Right, yeah, we have to keep track of the people that stay, guest nights and, the money and all the people that visit. Some of the visitation, like people coming off the interstate, it's a bit of guesswork, obviously, but if you do it the same way, consistently, at least you have the comparison, but hopefully we can have something digital with
Yeah,
technology.
we do have a contract now with Gibbon Parks, with City Data, which is a company that uses cell phone data to track visitation. So we just entered into that contract just a few months ago, so we're just starting to get figures on every park area, on how many people are using the parks and what areas they're going to, and so, yeah, so we just sent some stuff out to all the superintendents so they can start seeing where people are using their park, how long they're staying, so, yep, we're starting to get some really good numbers.
I'm not a fisherman, but how often and when do you stock that trout lake?
So, I don't stock it ever, but the fisheries division within the game parks, the trout they do, it used to always be like the third week in March, third week in October, which it still is, and then we've gotten them in May the last 2 years too. So we actually hit 3 stockings with more fish each time, so there's plenty of trout.
Those fish coming from Nebraska, from
They're from
hatcheries.
Nebraska hatcheries, it varies on where they come from year to year. The ones from this year came from Grove, so, but there's one in North Platte and Calamus and stuff, so it varies on availability, but they're always from Nebraska. Trout are actually one of the best things that we raise.
Thank you. You ought to be proud of your grandpa.
I am, I had a good time.
He was involved in a lot of things, and I was too, so.
Yep. I was just short of 23 when he passed away, so I knew him well. And,
I think I'm in that picture of the basketball. I think that was a donkey basketball game that night when that picture was taken.
When I read in the reporter, Dwayne, is that night they were playing a all-female I guess you call them barnstorming basketball team,
I was
who
involved.
sort of
with that.
modeled themselves after the Harlem Globetrotters. They called themselves the red-haired gals. But yeah, it was these guys from the Lions Club, again, middle-aged and old men getting out there with their shorts and having a good time and doing some fundraising for Lions Club projects, and knowing those guys, it would have gone to good works and not
I was in
to
that
them
game
partying
that
and doing
night
all
with
sorts of
the
stuff, so.
Globetrotter girls, they made a fool out of me, but yeah, they made a fool out of me.
Oh, yeah, Gene?
As you were giving the history back to when George Linger owned the property, it brought something to mind that I uncovered when working on the glass plate history. When Case bought that, prior to George Linger owning it, one of the purposes he had was he wanted to have a resort because there was a warm spring running through there. I found that, I can't remember now where I found that information, but it's when I was doing some of that research and sending it to Susan Rusk. So it sure had some thoughts back in the past.
That was called a warm slough.
I guess we want to look at that. I actually asked my brother-in-law about that, who's he works differently, basically retired now, but his education and background is an oil and gas geologist, graduated from Colorado Mines. He said that we could find out if there was a nose of some hot stuff underneath here somewhere, so we'd have to do some research on that, because it would have to have a heat source of some sort to warm up the water. Otherwise, it's all coming down from the mountains.
Now, whether he had accurate information when he bought it, I don't know, but
Yeah.
I think I found that in print.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to ask two quick questions. First of all, are you going to encourage people to come and take a look at all this stuff?
Have at.
Okay, and
I'll
then
just explain what I have here.
the second is, before you do that, I wanted to see if we could just give Kevin a round of applause so I can end this recording.